There are places on Earth where sleep becomes something other than rest, where closing your eyes requires preparation, where warmth is not given but carefully constructed, where the simple act of lying down to sleep is a negotiation with an environment that does not accommodate human life. Antarctica is such a place. It is the coldest continent, the driest, the windiest, and for half the year, it is wrapped in continuous darkness. The air temperature can fall to 70 degrees C below zero. The wind can blow at speeds that make standing upright impossible. And yet people sleep there outside in tents night after night. This is not a story about early explorers, though their experiences inform what happens today. This is about modern researchers, scientists, and support staff who work at the bottom of the world, collecting data that cannot be gathered anywhere else. They live at research stations equipped with heat and electricity, but their work often takes them away from those stations into the field, where they must sleep in conditions that would kill an unprepared person within hours. They do this not for adventure or record-setting, but because the science requires it. Ice cores must be drilled from remote glaciers. Meteorites must be collected from specific zones of blue ice. Weather stations must be serviced in locations far from any permanent shelter. When these researchers sleep outside in the Antarctic cold, they rely on systems developed over more than a century of polar exploration. Knowledge hard-won by earlier generations, refined through trial and error, codified into equipment and procedure. The tents they use, the sleeping bags they crawl into, the routines they follow each evening. All of these represent accumulated understanding of what it takes to survive a night at the coldest edge of human endurance. This is a documentary about that survival, about the layers of fabric and air that stand between a sleeping person and lethal cold, about the sounds of wind on nylon in absolute darkness, about what it feels like to wake in a tent when the temperature outside is colder than a household freezer can produce. The story unfolds slowly as these nights themselves unfold without drama, without crisis, simply the steady passage of hours in a place where every detail matters, and where sleep is never quite what it is anywhere else. It begins with darkness, with the transition into the polar night, and it moves through the routines and challenges that define what it means to rest when surrounded by one of the most hostile environments on the planet. There is no destination to reach, no mystery to solve. There is only the experience itself, the texture of these nights, and the quiet endurance of the people who live them. Let the wind settle around you. Let the temperature drop. We're going to spend time in the Antarctic darkness, in the tents where researchers sleep when the world outside is colder than most people will ever experience. We are going to understand how they do it, what it costs, and what it reveals about the relationship between human beings and the places that push them to their limits. There is a moment each year in Antarctica when the sun touches the horizon for the last time and does not rise again. This happens gradually over days, as the light grows weaker and the angle shallower until one afternoon, the sun simply slides away and darkness settles across the continent. For those living at research stations near the coast, this transition happens in late March or early April. For those farther inland on the high plateau, it can come earlier. The darkness that follows is not temporary. It lasts for months, 4 months in some places, 6 in others. A night that stretches from autumn into spring without interruption. The researchers who work in Antarctica know this darkness is coming. They prepare for it the way sailors prepare for a long voyage, checking equipment, organizing supplies, reviewing plans. Some of them will spend the winter at permanent research stations, living in heated buildings with electric lights and insulated walls. Others will leave before the darkness fully arrives, returning north to wait out the polar night. But a small number will venture into the field during these months, sleeping outside in tents while the temperature falls to 70 degrees C below zero, working in conditions that test the absolute limits of what the human body can endure. This is not exploration for its own sake. The researchers who sleep outside their bases during the polar night are there to gather data that cannot be obtained any other way. They drill ice from glaciers that hold records of Earth's climate, stretching back hundreds of thousands of years. They collect meteorites that lie exposed on the surface of ancient ice, preserved in a frozen archive. They measure the movement of ice sheets, track changes in snow accumulation, study the physics of how cold air behaves across the plateau. The work requires presence in the field, sometimes for days or weeks at a time in locations where no permanent shelter exists. The darkness changes everything. During the Antarctic summer, when the sun never sets, fieldwork operates on a different schedule. Teams can work long hours, dry equipment in the continuous daylight, navigate with better visibility. But in winter, with no natural light at all, every task becomes more difficult. Navigation relies entirely on GPS and dead reckoning. Equipment freezes more readily, the cold deepens, and sleep, already complicated by extreme temperature, becomes further disrupted by the absence of any natural daylight cycle. The human body is built to respond to light. Circadian rhythms, the internal clock that regulates sleep and wakefulness, depend on the sun. When that signal disappears, the body drifts. Sleep patterns become irregular. Some people find themselves waking at what their watch says is 3 o'clock in the morning, feeling fully alert. Others struggle to fall asleep at all, lying in their sleeping bags for hours, while their mind refuses to settle. The darkness is not restful. It is disorienting, a constant pressure that requires conscious management. Research stations try to impose structure on this. Meals happen at set times. Work shifts follow schedules. Artificial lighting mimics day and night cycles. But out in the field, in a tent miles from the nearest base, these structures fall away. Time becomes something you choose rather than something that happens to you. You decide when to call it night. You agree with your tent mates, if you have them, that now is the time to sleep. You set an alarm for what you will call morning, and then you prepare your sleeping system, climb inside, and hope your body cooperates. The transition into polar night does not happen all at once across Antarctica. The continent is enormous, nearly twice the size of Australia, and latitude determines when the sun disappears. At the South Pole, which sits at 90 degrees south, the sun sets around the spring equinox in late March and does not return until September. At coastal stations like McMurdo, located at 77 degrees south, the polar night is shorter, lasting from late April to mid-August. But even at these lower latitudes, the weeks before and after true polar night bring only brief periods of twilight, a dim glow on the horizon that never becomes day. For researchers planning fieldwork, this matters. A glaciology team drilling ice cores on the plateau will face different conditions in May than they would in July. In May, there might still be a few hours of dim light each day, enough to see the tent in front of you without a headlamp, enough to navigate short distances. By July, at the depth of winter, there is nothing. The darkness is complete. Headlamps and flashlights become essential for every task outside the tent. The beam of light carves a small tunnel through the black, showing you only what is directly in front of you, leaving everything else invisible. People describe this darkness in different ways. Some find it peaceful, a deep quiet that settles into their bones. Others find it oppressive, a weight that presses on them even inside a lit tent. What everyone agrees on is that it changes the experience of being in Antarctica. The continent is already alien, wind-swept ice stretching in every direction, temperatures that numb exposed skin in seconds, an emptiness so profound it feels like another planet. The darkness amplifies all of this. It removes the one familiar reference point, the sun, and replaces it with nothing. Sleep in this darkness is not like sleep anywhere else. There is no gradual dimming of light to signal the approach of night. There is no dawn to wake you. The transition into and out of sleep happens in a uniform black, marked only by the turning off and on of a headlamp, the closing and opening of eyes. Some researchers set alarm clocks that simulate sunrise, lights that gradually brighten inside the tent to ease the waking process. Others simply rely on alarms, jolting awakeness, darkness and cold, and the knowledge that another day of work awaits. The psychological impact of this cannot be overstated. Humans are DAL animals. We are built to be active during the day and rest at night. When those categories cease to exist, when every hour looks the same, the mind struggles to find its footing. Studies of people who winter over in Antarctica show increased rates of insomnia, depression, and cognitive difficulty during the polar night. The body's production of melatonin, The hormone that regulates sleep becomes dysregulated. Some people sleep too much, falling into long, unrefreshing stretches of unconsciousness. Others barely sleep at all, lying awake for hours despite exhaustion. Out in the field, these effects are compounded by the physical demands of the work and the stress of living in extreme cold. A researcher sleeping in a tent at 70 degrees below zero is not just dealing with darkness. They're also managing the constant need to stay warm, the effort of melting snow for water, the risk of frostbite, the vigilance required to keep equipment from freezing. Sleep becomes one more task to accomplish, one more challenge to navigate. It is necessary. The body cannot function without it, but it is never easy. The arrival of polar night is gradual, but there is usually a day that feels like a threshold. The day when you realize the sun is truly gone, when you step outside and see only stars, only the faint glow of aurora if you're lucky, only the reflected light of your own headlamp off the snow. That day marks the beginning of a different kind of time, a time measured not in days but in sleep cycles, not in sunrise and sunset, but in the arbitrary markers you create to give shape to the darkness. For researchers heading into the field, that day marks the start of the season when sleep will be hardest, when the cold will be deepest, and when the work will demand the most from their bodies and minds. They go anyway. They pack their gear, load their sleds, travel out across the ice to wherever their work requires them to be. And when night comes, though night is not the right word anymore, when it is time to stop working, they set up their tents, prepare their sleeping systems, and lie down to rest in the coldest, darkest place on Earth. Antarctica has no permanent human population. No one is born there. No one lives there in the way people live in other places with homes and families, and the expectation of continuity across generations. The people who come to Antarctica come temporarily for a season or a year, and then they leave. This has been true since the first humans arrived on the continent in the early 19th century, and it remains true today. The current human presence in Antarctica is organized around research. Countries from around the world maintain stations on the continent, staffed by scientists and support personnel who conduct studies in fields ranging from astronomy to marine biology to climate science. During the Antarctic summer from November to February, the population swells. Ships arrive carrying researchers and equipment. Planes land on ice runways. Stations that were quiet during the winter suddenly host dozens or hundreds of people. Field camps spring up across the continent. Temporary clusters of tents and equipment where teams work on specific projects before packing up and moving on. In winter, the population contracts. Most researchers leave before the polar night begins. Flights stop. Ships cannot reach the continent through the sea ice. The people who remain, typically between 100 and 500 across all Antarctic stations, are called winter rovers. They are the ones who keep the stations running during the months of darkness, maintaining power systems, conducting long-term experiments, collecting weather data. Some of them venture into the field even during winter, though this is less common and more dangerous than summer field work. The total number of people who sleep outside in tents during the Antarctic winter is small. It might be a few dozen in any given year, spread across the entire continent. These are specialists engaged in research that cannot wait for summer. Ice core drillers who need to reach remote glaciers when temperatures are stable. Meteorite hunters who work during winter because the low angle of sunlight when it returns in spring makes meteorites easier to spot against the snow. Technicians servicing remote weather stations, search and rescue personnel training for emergency response. Each of these people knows what they are signing up for. Antarctic fieldwork requires medical clearance, survival training, and demonstrated competence in the skills necessary to stay alive in extreme cold. Before anyone sleeps in a tent at 70 degrees below zero, they have already spent time learning how to operate in less severe conditions. They have practiced setting up tents in wind. They have learned how to prevent and treat frostbite. They have been taught what to do if their equipment fails, if weather traps them in place, if someone in their team becomes injured or ill. The research stations that serve as bases for this fieldwork are themselves exercises in survival. McMurdo Station, the largest research station in Antarctica, can house more than 1,000 people during summer. It has dormitories, cafeterias, laboratories, a fire station, a power plant, even a small store. But McMurdo is also a collection of buildings on volcanic rock at the edge of the Ross Ice Shelf, surrounded by one of the harshest environments on the planet. Every piece of equipment, every bit of food, every drop of fuel has to be brought in from outside. Nothing grows there. Nothing is native except ice and rock and wind. Other stations are smaller. The Amundsen Scott South Pole Station sits at the geographic South Pole on the high plateau, nearly 3,000 m above sea level. The air pressure at that elevation is lower, making it feel even colder than the temperature would suggest. The station is enclosed in a large building elevated on stilts to prevent it from being buried by drifting snow. In winter, temperatures at the pole regularly drop below 80 degrees C. The winter over crew numbers around 50 people. They live and work in a sealed environment, venturing outside only when necessary, and even then for limited periods. Field camps are nothing like these stations. A typical field camp consists of a few tents, a portable toilet, supply caches protected from wind, and whatever scientific equipment the team needs for their work. There is no running water, no electricity beyond what solar panels or generators can provide, no heat except what people generate inside their tents. The camp is temporary by design. When the work is done, everything gets packed up and removed, leaving nothing behind except perhaps a marker for GPS coordinates. The researchers who live in these camps are self-sufficient by necessity. They bring all their own food, fuel, and equipment. They melt snow for drinking water. They cook on portable stoves. They navigate using GPS because landmarks are scarce or non-existent in the featureless white of the interior. If something breaks, they fix it themselves or do without. Resupply is difficult and depends on weather. In winter, it may not be possible at all. Communication with the outside world is limited, but maintained. Satellite phones and radios allow field teams to check in with their base station, report their status, request help if needed. Weather forecasts get relayed out to the field so teams can prepare for incoming storms. But the conversations are brief and functional. There is no casual browsing of the internet, no video calls, no streaming of music or movies. The isolation is real. This isolation is both physical and psychological. Physical because you are in fact far from any other human beings. Psychological because even when you're with a team, the environment creates a kind of solitude. Everyone is focused on the same basic challenges: staying warm, completing the work, managing the cold. Conversations tend to be practical. There is less energy for socializing when every action requires extra effort. The work that brings people into the field is varied. Glaciologists study the flow of ice sheets, drilling cores to extract samples that reveal how climate has changed over millennia. The ice in Antarctica is layered like tree rings, with each layer representing a year of snowfall. Air bubbles trapped in the ice contain samples of ancient atmosphere. By analyzing these cores, scientists can reconstruct temperatures, atmospheric composition, even volcanic eruptions from hundreds of thousands of years ago. Meteorite hunters search for rocks that have fallen from space. Antarctica is one of the best places in the world to find meteorites because the ice sheet acts as a collection mechanism. Meteorites that fall on the ice get buried by snow, then carried slowly toward the coast by the flow of the ice. In certain areas where ice flows up against mountains or encounters other obstacles, the surface ice ablates. It evaporates without melting, leaving meteorites exposed on the surface. Teams search these areas systematically, collecting samples that are sent to laboratories around the world for study. Weather research requires placing instruments in specific locations and servicing them regularly. These stations measure wind speed, temperature, barometric pressure, solar radiation. Some of them operate automatically, but others need periodic maintenance, replacing batteries, downloading data, clearing snow from sensors. In winter, this maintenance becomes difficult, but remains necessary. Biological research happens mostly near the coast, where life is more abundant. But even inland, there are questions about microbial life in extreme cold, about how organisms adapt to conditions that seem incompatible with life. Some researchers study the ice itself, its mechanical properties, its response to stress, the way it deforms under its own weight. All of this research requires people to be present in locations where staying alive is work. The stations provide a base, a place to return to, but the actual data collection happens in the field. And in the field, especially during winter, sleep is something you have to build. The Antarctic Plateau is a desert. Snow falls there, but not much. Only a few cm per year in some areas, less than the Sahara receives in rain. What snow does fall stays. It accumulates over millennia, compressing under its own weight into ice that can be more than 4,000 meters thick. The plateau itself sits at high elevation, much of it above 3,000 m. The air is thin. The horizon is flat in every direction. The view is the same, white ice extending to the curve of the Earth. In winter, this plateau becomes one of the coldest places on the planet. The temperature at the Russian Vostok station, located near the center of East Antarctica, has been recorded as low as 89 degrees C below zero. Even more commonly accessible areas of the plateau regularly see temperatures between 60 and 70 degrees below zero during the winter months. This cold is not like cold in other places. It is absolute. It has a presence. It is something you feel even before you step outside. A weight in the air, a sharpness that makes your lungs tighten. The cold behaves in ways that are difficult to understand if you have not experienced it. Metal becomes brittle. Plastic shatters. Rubber loses all flexibility. Fuel thickens until it barely flows. Batteries drain in minutes. Human skin, if exposed, freezes in seconds. Breath turns to ice crystals before it leaves your mouth. These crystals hang in the air, glittering in the beam of a headlamp, creating halos around lights. The phenomenon is called diamond dust, and it is beautiful in a way that makes the cold feel even more alien. The wind on the plateau is a separate force. Antarctica is the windiest continent, and much of that wind originates on the plateau. Cold air is dense. It sinks on the high interior of the continent. This cold air pools, then begins to flow downward toward the coast, accelerating as it goes. These are katabatic winds, gravity-driven currents of freezing air that can reach speeds exceeding 300 km/h in some coastal areas. On the plateau itself, the wind is more variable, sometimes calm, sometimes gusting to 80 or 100 km/h. Enough to make walking difficult and tent camping dangerous. Wind makes cold worse. The human body generates heat constantly, warming a thin layer of air next to the skin. When wind blows, it strips this warm layer away, replacing it with cold air. The body has to work harder to maintain its core temperature. This effect is quantified as wind chill, a measure of how cold it feels when wind is factored in. At 70 degrees below zero, with a wind speed of 30 km/h, the wind chill can drop below 100 degrees. At that point, exposed skin freezes almost instantly. The plateau is also dark for much of the winter. The polar night at the South Pole lasts from late March to late September. 6 months of continuous darkness broken only by stars, and occasionally the southern lights. At other locations on the plateau, the duration of darkness varies. But even at the margins, winter brings long periods where the sun does not rise. The darkness is not dramatic. There are no sunsets in the usual sense. The light simply fades over weeks, growing dimmer and more oblique until it is gone. In this darkness, navigation becomes difficult. During summer, teams traveling on the plateau can see landmarks, can orient themselves by the position of the sun, can judge distance by sight. In winter, with no light and often no visible features, navigation depends entirely on instruments. GPS provides coordinates, but it does not tell you about crevasses hidden under snow bridges, about srugi, wind-carved ridges of hard snow that can break equipment and make travel exhausting, about areas where the surface is unstable. Teams traveling on the plateau in winter move slowly, cautiously, probing the snow ahead of them, trusting their instruments, but aware that conditions can change suddenly. The surface of the plateau is not smooth. Wind sculpts the snow into patterns. Sastrugi can be half a meter high or more, hard enough to damage skis and sleds, irregular enough to make each step a negotiation. In some areas, the surface is polished ice, smooth and slick. In others, it is soft powder that offers no support, where each footstep sinks deep and pulls energy from your legs. The variability is exhausting. You cannot establish a rhythm. Every kilometer requires attention. The air on the plateau is dry. Humidity is nearly zero. The cold prevents the air from holding moisture, and what little moisture exists quickly turns to ice and falls as diamond dust. This dryness affects everything. Skin cracks and bleeds. Lips split. Noses bleed. Breathing becomes irritating. The air so dry it feels like sandpaper in your throat and lungs. Researchers in the field drink constantly, trying to stay hydrated, but the body loses moisture faster than they can replace it. Dehydration is a constant background condition. The silence is another feature of the plateau. When the wind stops, which it sometimes does, the quiet is profound. There are no animals, no insects, no birds, no running water, no rustling leaves. If you stand still and the wind is calm, you hear only your own breathing, your own heartbeat, the creak of your clothing. Some people find this silence restful. Others find it unnerving, a reminder of how absent life is from this place. The cold also changes sound. At very low temperatures, sound travels differently. Voices carry farther. The crunch of footsteps on snow is sharper, crisper. But some sounds disappear entirely. Fabrics stop rustling. Plastics stop crackling. Everything becomes muted in a way that feels unnatural, as if the cold has damped down the world itself. Living on the plateau in winter means living inside these conditions. There is no escape from the cold. No moment when you are truly warm, except deep inside your sleeping bag after hours of generating heat. There is no escape from the darkness except the small bubble of light from your headlamp. There is no escape from the wind except the fragile shelter of your tent. Every action takes longer, requires more energy, demands more attention, and sleep, which in most places is a retreat from the demands of the day, becomes one more challenge to manage. The plateau does not care whether you sleep or not. It does not care whether you're comfortable or frightened or exhausted. It is indifferent in the way that only geology and climate can be indifferent. It simply is. And you sleeping in a tent on its surface are a temporary presence that will leave no mark. Establishing a field camp in the Antarctic winter is a process that takes hours and requires precision. The work begins before anyone arrives at the site with planning that accounts for location, weather forecasts, the duration of the planned stay, and the number of people who will be sleeping there. Teams do not simply show up and pitch tents. They arrive with a clear plan for where each tent will go, how the camp will be oriented relative to prevailing winds, where supply caches will be placed, and how the site will be marked so that tents remain findable if blowing snow obscures them. Location matters. The ideal site is flat with stable snow, protected from the worst of the wind by terrain features if possible. Crevasses must be avoided. Teams probe the snow ahead of them with poles, testing for hidden gaps in the ice. They look for areas where the wind has already compacted the snow, making it firmer and less likely to drift. They avoid low spots where cold air can pull, making the temperature even lower than it already is. Once a site is chosen, the first task is marking it. Bamboo poles or wands topped with flags get placed at intervals around the camp perimeter. These markers serve multiple purposes. They define the boundaries of the camp, help with navigation during whiteout conditions when visibility drops to zero, and make it easier to find the camp again if the team leaves and returns. In winter darkness, these markers are critical. Without them, a tent that is 10 meters away can be invisible. The tents used in Antarctic field camps are designed for extreme conditions. The most common design is the pyramid tent, sometimes called a Scott tent, after the explorer Robert Falcon Scott, whose team used this style during early Antarctic expeditions. The pyramid tent has a square base and 4 triangular sides that meet at a peak. A single pole in the center supports the structure. The shape is stable in wind. The pyramid sheds gusts rather than catching them, and the single pole makes setup simpler than designs requiring multiple poles. The fabric is typically bright orange or yellow colors, chosen for visibility against snow. Another common design is the tunnel tent, which has a low profile and aerodynamic shape. Tunnel tents use flexible poles that arch over the length of the tent, creating a tube-like interior. These tents are more vulnerable to crosswinds, but perform well when oriented correctly. They are lighter than pyramid tents and pack smaller, making them popular for teams that need to move frequently. Both designs rely on guidelines, ropes attached to the tent, and staked into the snow to keep the tent stable. In soft snow, stakes do not hold well, so teams use dead men instead. A dead man is any object buried in the snow with a line attached. It can be a stuff sack filled with snow, a shovel, a bag of equipment, anything with enough weight and surface area to resist being pulled out. The team digs a trench, places the dead man at the bottom, buries it, and compacts the snow over it. The guideline runs from the buried object to the tent. When the snow freezes around the dead man, it becomes a solid anchor. Setting up a tent in 70° below zero cold is physically demanding. Your hands get cold even inside gloves. Your face is covered by a balaclava and goggles, limiting your field of vision. Your clothing is bulky, restricting movement. The tent fabric is stiff from cold, difficult to fold and manipulate. The pole, if metal, is painful to touch, even through gloves. Every action takes longer than it would in moderate conditions. And you're working against the clock because the longer you're outside, the more heat you lose. The process typically involves several people. One person holds the tent in place while others stake or bury dead men. Someone else threads the pole through the top of the tent and raises it, lifting the fabric into shape. Guidelines get adjusted, tightened, checked for security. The team digs a small trench around the perimeter of the tent, then piles snow onto the tent skirt, a strip of fabric extending from the base, and compacts it. This snow anchor adds stability and helps seal the bottom of the tent against wind-driven snow. Once the tent is up, the team builds a windbreak. This is a wall of snow, usually upwind of the tent, constructed by cutting blocks from compacted snow and stacking them. The wall does not need to be tall. A meter or so is often enough, but it needs to be solid. The wind will hit this wall instead of hitting the tent directly, reducing the force on the tent fabric and guidelines. Building the wall is hard work. Cutting snow blocks with a saw, lifting them, placing them. All of this requires energy and generates heat. People sweat inside their layers of clothing, which becomes a problem later when that sweat turns to ice. Inside the tent, the team creates a living space. Sleeping pads get arranged on the floor. Sleeping bags get unpacked and laid out. Gear gets organized with items needed frequently placed within easy reach, and items needed less often stacked near the walls. If the tent is large enough, a small vestibule area near the door becomes the kitchen, a spot where stoves can be operated safely, where snow can be brought in to melt for water, where food can be prepared. In smaller tents, the kitchen is wherever there is space, often between sleeping pads. The tent becomes a microenvironment. Outside, the temperature is 70° below zero. Inside, with the door sealed and no heat source running, the temperature is still 70° below zero. The tent provides no insulation in the thermal sense. What it provides is protection from wind. Wind is what makes the cold lethal. Without wind, the human body can survive much colder temperatures because the layer of warm air next to the skin stays in place. The tent holds that still air, creating a space where cold is manageable rather than immediately life-threatening. Heat sources inside the tent are limited. Some teams use small portable stoves for cooking and melting snow, and these stoves add warmth to the interior while they run. But running a stove inside a tent is dangerous. Stoves consume oxygen and produce carbon monoxide. Ventilation is necessary, which means opening a vent or door which lets in cold air. The balance is delicate. Too much ventilation and the tent stays cold. Too little and the air becomes unsafe to breathe. Teams monitor this carefully, keeping stoves on only as long as needed, ensuring vents remain open, watching for signs of carbon monoxide poisoning, headache, dizziness, nausea. The floor of the tent is often not level. Snow surfaces are rarely flat, and even after site preparation, there are usually bumps and depressions. Sleeping pads help, but you still feel the irregularities beneath you. Some people dig shallow trenches in the snow to create flat spots for sleeping. Others accept the uneven surface and position themselves as best they can. Over multiple nights, the snow under the tent compacts from body weight, gradually becoming more level. But this takes time. Lighting inside the tent comes from headlamps and small lanterns. These run on batteries which drain quickly in extreme cold. Teams keep spare batteries warm inside their clothing, swapping them out when the current set dies. The light is necessary for any task: cooking, organizing gear, finding something in a pack. But it also serves a psychological purpose. In the unbroken darkness of the polar night, having light inside the tent creates a sense of enclosure, of safety. Even though the light itself does nothing to change the reality of where you are, field camps are temporary by design, but some are used repeatedly over multiple seasons. These semi-permanent camps might have cache supplies, fuel drums, food stores, equipment buried in the snow and marked for future use. Returning teams dig up these caches, check what is still usable, and add to them if needed. The snow preserves things well. Food frozen at 70 below stays frozen indefinitely. Fuel does not degrade. Equipment, if protected from moisture and wind, remains functional. The camp is a small human presence in a vast inhuman space. At night, when the tents are lit from inside, they glow like lanterns on the snow. From a distance, if anyone were there to see, the camp would look fragile, temporary, almost absurd. But from inside the tent, the camp is everything. It is shelter, workspace, the boundary between being able to sleep and being exposed to conditions that would kill you. Setting it up correctly is not optional. It is survival. The tent stands between you and the wind. This is its primary function, its reason for existing in the Antarctic field environment. The fabric is not thick. It does not insulate in the way a wall insulates. If you touch the inside of the tent wall with your hand, you can feel the cold radiating through it, almost as if the fabric is not there. But the fabric does one essential thing. It stops moving air. Wind chill is the difference between cold that can be managed and cold that kills. At 70 degrees C below zero with no wind, a person wearing proper clothing can survive outside for extended periods. The body generates heat, insulation traps that heat close to the skin. As long as the layer of warmed air stays in place, the cold remains outside the clothing system. But when wind blows, it strips away that warm layer, replaces it instantly with freezing air, and forces the body to work harder to generate more heat. The body has limits. It cannot keep up indefinitely. Wind chill drives the effective temperature down past the point where survival is possible without shelter. The tent creates still air. Inside, the air is just as cold as outside, but it is not moving. This makes an enormous difference. A researcher inside a tent without a sleeping bag, wearing only the clothing they would wear for outdoor work, would still eventually succumb to hypothermia. The tent alone is not enough to keep someone alive indefinitely, but it buys time. It changes the calculation from minutes to hours, and when combined with a proper sleeping system, it makes sleep possible. The tent also provides a psychological boundary. The mind understands walls, even walls made of thin nylon, even walls that offer no real protection from cold, still register as shelter. Inside the tent, people feel safer. They lower their guard slightly, allow themselves to relax in ways they cannot when fully exposed to the environment. This psychological effect matters. Stress increases metabolic rate, burns calories, makes it harder to sleep. The tent reduces stress simply by existing by marking a space that feels, if not safe, at least safer. Condensation is a constant issue inside Antarctic tents. Human bodies produce moisture through breath and perspiration. In moderate climates, this moisture evaporates into the air or is wicked away by clothing. In extreme cold, it cannot. The air inside the tent is already too cold to hold much moisture. When warm breath from a sleeping bag contacts the cold tent fabric, it condenses instantly, forming frost. This frost accumulates over hours and days, coating the interior of the tent with a layer of ice crystals. In the morning, when people move around inside the tent, this frost dislodges. It falls like snow, dusting sleeping bags and gear. If someone bumps the tent wall, a cascade of ice crystals comes down. The frost is not just annoying. It is water that is now inside your sleeping bag, inside your clothing where it will melt from body heat and then refreeze. stealing warmth in the process. Managing this frost is a constant task. Some teams try to brush it off the tent walls each morning, carefully collecting it and removing it from the tent. Others accept it as inevitable and focus instead on keeping their sleeping bags dry. Ventilation reduces condensation but lets in cold air. Most expedition tents have vents, small openable panels near the top of the tent that allow moisture-laden air to escape while minimizing the amount of cold air that enters. These vents work on the principle that warm air rises. The warmest, most moisture-saturated air inside the tent will be near the ceiling. Opening a vent there lets that air out. Cold air entering through the vent sinks to the floor where it has less impact on people inside sleeping bags. The system is not perfect, but it helps. The shape of the tent matters for wind resistance. Pyramid tents with their steep sides and pointed tops shed wind well. The wind hits a sloped surface and deflects upward, reducing the pressure on the fabric. Tunnel tents, if oriented correctly with a door facing away from the wind, also perform well. Dome tents, common in recreational camping, are less suitable for Antarctica because their rounded shape catches wind, creating more stress on the poles and fabric. Tent fabric itself has evolved significantly. Early Antarctic explorers used canvas, which was heavy, prone to tearing, and absorbed moisture. Modern expedition tents use rip-top nylon or similar synthetic fabrics that are lightweight, strong, and resist water absorption. The fabric is often double-layered with an inner tent and an outer fly. The space between the layers creates a small insulating air gap and provides a place for condensation to form without immediately affecting the interior. Color is also a consideration. Bright colors orange, yellow, red are chosen not for aesthetics but for visibility. In whiteout conditions, when blowing snow reduces visibility to a few meters, a brightly colored tent is much easier to spot than a dark or neutral-toned one. This can be life-saving if someone needs to leave the tent briefly and becomes disoriented. Being able to see the tent even from a short distance can mean the difference between finding your way back and wandering into the emptiness. Guidelines require constant attention. Wind in Antarctica is not steady. It gusts, pulling at the tent from different directions, creating forces that shift moment to moment. Guidelines stretch, stakes pull out, dead men shift in the snow. Teams check their guidelines regularly, retightening them, reburying stakes, adding snow to anchor points. A tent that was secure in the evening might be loose by morning. Maintenance is ongoing. Inside the tent, space is limited. A typical 4-person pyramid tent has a floor area of about 3 m by 3 m tapering toward the peak. This space must accommodate 4 sleeping pads, 4 sleeping bags, personal gear for 4 people, food supplies, stove equipment, and whatever scientific instruments or samples need to be kept from freezing. Organization is necessary. Gear gets stored in stuffed sacks and labeled. Items used frequently stay accessible. Items needed only occasionally go near the walls or get stacked. Clutter becomes a safety issue. If you need to find something quickly in an emergency, you cannot afford to dig through piles of unsorted gear. The door of the tent is a zipper, usually reinforced and large enough to allow passage while wearing bulky clothing. Opening the door means letting in cold air and wind. Closing it means sealing yourself into the tent's microenvironment. The threshold of the tent door becomes significant. Crossing it is a transition, a movement from one state to another. Outside you are exposed, vigilant, managing the cold with every breath. Inside, you are sheltered, relatively safe, able to focus on tasks other than immediate survival. Some tents have vestibules, small extensions near the door where gear can be stored without taking up space in the main sleeping area. Boots go in the vestibule. Outerwear, if it is too cold to bring inside, stays there. Fuel bottles, shovels, and other items that do not need to be kept warm are also stored in the vestibule. This keeps the main tent area cleaner and more organized, and it provides a buffer zone where cold air entering through the door does not immediately flood the sleeping area. The tent is not permanent. It is a temporary structure that could be dismantled in an hour if necessary. But for the days or weeks it stands, it is home. It is the only enclosed space for miles, perhaps hundreds of miles. It is where you eat, where you organize your work, where you make decisions about the next day's plan, and most importantly, it is where you sleep. The fabric walls, thin as they are, cold as they are, become the edge of your world. Everything inside them is manageable. Everything outside them is not. A sleeping bag designed for Antarctic conditions is not a single object. It is a system composed of multiple layers, each addressing a specific aspect of heat retention. The goal of this system is to create and maintain a microenvironment around the sleeping person, a zone where the temperature is high enough for the body to rest without expending all its energy on heat production. Achieving this in 70 degrees below zero cold requires understanding how heat moves and how to prevent it from escaping. Heat leaves the body in 4 ways. Conduction transfers heat through direct contact. If you lie on ice, heat flows from your warm body into the cold ice beneath you. Convection transfers heat through moving air. If cold air circulates around you, it carries away your body heat. Radiation transfers heat through infrared energy emitted by warm objects. Your body radiates heat into the surrounding space. Evaporation transfers heat when moisture turns from liquid to vapor, taking thermal energy with it. Each of these mechanisms must be addressed for a sleeping system to work in extreme cold. The sleeping bag addresses radiation and convection. Its outer shell is made from a tightly woven wind-resistant fabric that blocks air movement. Cold air cannot circulate inside the bag. The interior is filled with insulation, either synthetic fibers or down feathers that traps thousands of tiny pockets of air. These pockets are the actual insulating material. The fibers or feathers simply hold the air in place. Still air is a poor conductor of heat, so the trapped air forms a barrier that slows the transfer of warmth from your body to the cold environment outside the bag. Down insulation. The soft undercoating of waterfowl is highly effective because it creates very small air pockets and compresses well for transport. A given weight of down provides more insulation than the same weight of synthetic material. However, down has a critical weakness. It loses its insulating ability when wet. If moisture gets into down insulation, the feathers clump together, the air pockets collapse, and the insulation fails. In Antarctica, where all moisture turns to ice, this is a serious problem. Synthetic insulation does not have this weakness. Synthetic fibers retain their structure even when damp or frozen, continuing to trap air and provide insulation. For this reason, many Antarctic sleeping bags use synthetic fill despite it being heavier and bulkier than down. The trade-off, carrying more weight in exchange for reliability, is considered worthwhile. Temperature ratings for sleeping bags are standardized, but can be misleading. A bag rated to -40 degrees C is expected to keep an average person alive and reasonably comfortable down to that temperature, assuming other factors are optimal. But comfortable is subjective and optimal is rarely the case in the field. Factors like individual metabolism, clothing worn inside the bag, the quality of the sleeping pad beneath you, humidity, and how well fed and hydrated you are all affect how cold you feel. In practice, researchers sleeping at 70 below often use sleeping bags rated for -50 or colder. And even then, they are not warm, they are simply not dying. Some teams use 2 sleeping bags, one inside the other. The inner bag might be a moderate weight bag rated to -20. The outer bag is a heavier expedition model rated to -50. Together, they provide more insulation than either bag alone, and the layering creates additional dead air space. This system is heavier and bulkier, making it impractical for teams that need to move quickly. But for stationary camps where weight is less of a concern, the extra warmth is worth it. Vapor barrier liners add another layer to the system. These are thin, waterproof bags that go inside the sleeping bag next to your body. The concept seems counterintuitive. You're sealing yourself inside a non-breathable layer that traps all the moisture your body produces. But this is intentional. Without a vapor barrier, moisture from your breath and perspiration migrates outward into the sleeping bag's insulation. Once there, it condenses and freezes, adding weight to the bag and reducing its insulating ability. Over days or weeks in the field, a sleeping bag without vapor barrier protection can accumulate kg of ice. The vapor barrier prevents this by keeping moisture on the inside next to your skin, where body heat keeps it liquid. You wake up damp, but your sleeping bag stays dry. The dampness is uncomfortable, but it is manageable. A wet sleeping bag in extreme cold is not. The trade-off is clear. Teams that use vapor barriers accept being damp in exchange for maintaining their insulation. Sleeping pads address conduction. The ground in Antarctica is ice, sometimes covered by a layer of snow, but ice nonetheless. Ice is an excellent conductor of heat. If you lie directly on it, heat will flow out of your body into the ice at a rate that makes sleep impossible. Your back, your legs, your shoulders, all the parts of you in contact with the ground will get cold fast. Even with a sleeping bag, if there is no insulation between you and the ice, you will not stay warm. Sleeping pads create that insulation. They are made from foam or contain air chambers that provide a barrier between your body and the ground. The effectiveness of a sleeping pad is measured by its R value, a number that indicates thermal resistance. Higher R values mean better insulation. For Antarctic conditions, an R value of 5 or higher is recommended. Many researchers use two pads stacked together, combining a closed-cell foam pad with an inflatable insulated pad to achieve R values of 7 or 8. Closed-cell foam pads are simple and reliable. They're sheets of dense foam that do not compress much under weight and do not require inflation. They do not fail. If you puncture a foam pad, it still works. If it gets wet, it still works. The downside is that foam pads are bulky and less comfortable than inflatable pads. Inflatable pads are more comfortable and pack smaller, but come with risk. If an inflatable pad develops a leak, it loses its insulating ability. In extreme cold, repairing a punctured pad is difficult. Glue does not bond well at 70 below, and finding the leak requires inflation, which requires warmth and time. For this reason, many researchers carry a backup foam pad even if their primary pad is inflatable. The shape of the sleeping pad also matters. Full-length pads provide insulation from head to toe. Shorter pads which cover only the torso and hips save weight, but leave the legs with less insulation. In extreme cold, full-length pads are standard. The small weight savings of a shorter pad are not worth the loss of warmth. The sleeping system extends beyond the bag and pad to include clothing. What you wear inside the sleeping bag affects how warm you are. Too much clothing traps sweat and reduces the effectiveness of the insulation. Too little and you rely entirely on the bag to keep you warm. The balance is individual and learned through experience. Most researchers sleep in a base layer. Long underwear made from synthetic or wool fabric that wicks moisture away from the skin. Some add a light insulating layer like a fleece jacket or insulated pants. Socks are essential. Feet get cold quickly because they are at the edge of circulation and often damp from the day's activity. Dry socks changed before getting into the sleeping bag make a significant difference. Hats are also worn. A significant amount of body heat can be lost through the head. And while sleeping bags have hoods that cinch down around the face, wearing a hat inside the hood adds warmth. Some people sleep with balaclavas or neck gaiters that cover more of the face, reducing the amount of exposed skin where breath can condense and freeze. Boots cannot go inside the sleeping bag. They're too cold and too dirty. But if boots are left outside the bag, they freeze solid, becoming impossible to put on in the morning without warming them first. The solution is to place boot liners, the removable inner layer of the boot, inside the sleeping bag near your feet. The liners stay warm or at least flexible, and in the morning, they can be inserted back into the frozen outer boot shells, making the boots wearable. This is uncomfortable. Having cold boot liners near your feet is not pleasant, but it is necessary. Water bottles face the same issue. Water left outside the sleeping bag will freeze. Water frozen in a bottle can split the bottle or make it impossible to drink. Some researchers keep water bottles inside their sleeping bags overnight, using body heat to prevent freezing. Others keep bottles inside their clothing during the day and drink before it has a chance to freeze. The sleeping system, when fully assembled, is heavy. A -50 rated sleeping bag can weigh 3 to 4 kilo. Had a vapor barrier liner, an insulated sleeping pad, a backup foam pad, and the total weight approaches 6 or 7 kilo. For teams traveling long distances on foot or by ski, this weight matters, but there is no alternative. You cannot sleep in Antarctica without proper insulation, and proper insulation has weight. Each piece of the system is critical. Remove any one element, the pad, the bag, the vapor barrier, and the system degrades. It might still work in moderate cold, but at 70 below, there is no margin for error. Every layer, every pocket of trapped air, every barrier to heat loss is necessary. The sleeping system is also personal. Each researcher learns what works for their own body. Some people sleep warm and need less insulation. Others sleep cold and add extra layers. Some tolerate vapor barriers well. Others find them unbearable and accept the gradual icing of their sleeping bag instead. These are not choices made casually. They are decisions based on experience, on nights spent in the cold, on waking up shivering and making adjustments. In the end, the sleeping system is the only thing that allows sleep to happen in Antarctica. Without it, the cold is absolute. With it, sleep becomes possible, though never easy. The layers of fabric, the pockets of air, the careful assembly of insulation and barriers, all of this builds a fragile space where the human body can rest for a few hours before facing the cold again. In most environments, water is essential for life. In Antarctica, during winter field operations, water is the thing that can kill you, not liquid water. There is almost none of that, but the water your body produces in the form of breath and sweat. Water that becomes frost and ice and gradually undermines every system you depend on for survival. The human body is mostly water. An adult body produces roughly 1 liter of water per day through respiration and perspiration, even at rest. In the extreme cold of Antarctica, this water does not evaporate into the air the way it would in a temperate climate. The air is too cold to hold moisture. Instead, the water turns directly to ice wherever it contacts a surface colder than freezing. This includes the inside of your clothing, the inside of your sleeping bag, the walls of your tent, even the inside of your goggles. Breath is a major source of moisture. Every exhale releases warm, humid air. In 70 below zero temperatures, this moisture instantly condenses, forming ice crystals that hang in the air as diamond dust or settle onto whatever is nearby. If you breathe inside your sleeping bag, the moisture condenses on the bag's interior fabric and freezes. Over multiple nights, this ice builds up, adding weight to the bag and reducing its ability to insulate. A sleeping bag that starts the expedition weighing 3 kilos can gain 1 kilogram or more of ice by the end of a week. This is why vapor barrier liners exist. By trapping moisture next to the body, they prevent it from migrating into the sleeping bag's insulation. But using a vapor barrier means sleeping damp. Your skin stays moist. Your base layers may become wet. This is uncomfortable and feels wrong. Instinct says to stay dry in the cold, but the alternative is worse. A sleeping bag full of ice loses its loft. Its air pockets compress, and it no longer keeps you warm. Sweat is another problem. Physical work in extreme cold requires heavy insulation, but heavy insulation causes overheating during activity. When you overheat, you sweat. That sweat soaks into your clothing. If the clothing is against your skin, the sweat freezes once you stop moving, creating a layer of ice between you and your insulation. If the clothing is on the outside, the sweat still freezes, making the fabric stiff and reducing its ability to trap air. Managing this requires careful attention to layers. Researchers learn to vent their clothing during activity, opening zippers and cuffs to let heat escape before they start sweating. They remove layers when they feel themselves getting warm. They put layers back on before they start getting cold. This constant adjustment is exhausting, but it is necessary. Once you are wet with sweat, you cannot easily get dry again. The moisture stays with you, stealing heat until you can get inside a tent and ideally change into dry clothing. Drying wet clothing in the field is difficult. There is no source of heat beyond a small stove, and running the stove continuously to dry clothes is impractical due to fuel limitations and the danger of carbon monoxide buildup. Some items can be dried by hanging them inside the tent and letting body heat and air circulation slowly evaporate the moisture. But evaporation requires energy, heat, and in extreme cold, that process is very slow. A damp sock might take a full day to dry inside a tent. A heavier item like a jacket might not dry at all. During summer field work, When the sun is above the horizon continuously, wet items can be spread on the snow outside the tent and left to dry. The sun provides warmth, and even if the air temperature is below freezing, the solar radiation can evaporate moisture. This process, called sublimation, turns ice directly into vapor, without passing through a liquid phase. It works, but it is slow. In winter, with no sunlight, sublimation still occurs, but at a much reduced rate. Drying anything becomes nearly impossible. The result is that researchers accept a baseline level of dampness in their gear. Clothing is never completely dry. Sleeping bags accumulate moisture despite vapor barriers. Tent walls are coated with frost. This is the reality of extended fieldwork in extreme cold. You manage the moisture as best you can, but you cannot eliminate it. Goggles and face masks present their own challenges. Breath escaping from a face mask rises and condenses on goggle lenses, forming a layer of ice that obscures vision. Clearing this ice requires removing the goggles, warming them, scraping them clean, and putting them back on, all while exposed to the cold. Some goggles have ventilation systems designed to reduce fogging, but these systems only work if the temperature differential between inside and outside the goggle is not too extreme. At 70 below, the differential is too extreme, and fogging is unavoidable. Face masks themselves collect ice from breath. After an hour outside, the mask will have a thick layer of ice on its surface. This ice makes the mask stiff and uncomfortable, and it reduces the mask's ability to insulate. Each time you come back to the tent, the mask needs to be beaten against something hard to knock off the accumulated ice. The process is repeated multiple times a day. Zippers freeze. The metal or plastic teeth collect moisture, which freezes, locking the zipper in place. Freeing a frozen zipper requires warming it, often by holding it in your hands or breathing on it, which adds more moisture. Lubricants that work in moderate cold thicken or freeze at extreme cold temperatures, becoming useless. Some teams coat zippers with wax or graphite to reduce friction. But even these solutions have limits. Boots are particularly vulnerable to moisture. Feet sweat even in cold conditions because boots are heavily insulated and restrict airflow. This sweat soaks into boot liners and socks. If the liners are not removed and dried each night, they freeze solid. Putting on frozen boots in the morning is painful and can lead to frostbite. The solution is to remove the liners each evening and place them inside the sleeping bag to keep them warm. The outer shells of the boots freeze, but shells can be warmed by bringing them into the tent or by placing them in the sleeping bag's foot area, though this is uncomfortable. Fuel bottles and stoves also suffer from moisture. Fuel itself does not freeze at Antarctic temperatures, but the valves and fittings on fuel bottles can collect moisture that freezes and blocks the flow of fuel. Stoves have small jets and openings that can clog with ice. Before each use, stoves must be checked, warmed if necessary, and cleared of any ice buildup. A stove that fails is not just an inconvenience. It means no melted water, no hot food, and a much greater risk of hypothermia. Melting snow for water is a constant task in the field. The human body needs water to function, and in the dry air of Antarctica, dehydration happens quickly. But there is no liquid water to drink. Every drop must be melted from snow. This requires fuel and time. A stove running for an hour might melt enough snow to produce 2 or 3 L of water. For a team of 4 people, that amount barely covers basic needs. Drinking enough to stay fully hydrated requires melting snow multiple times per day. The snow used for melting must be chosen carefully. Surface snow is often contaminated by wind-blown dust or has low density, requiring more volume to produce the same amount of water. Older compacted snow is better. It is denser and cleaner. Teams dig below the surface to get to this older snow, cutting blocks or shoveling it into pots. The melting process adds moisture to the tent. Steam rises from the pot, condenses on the cold tent walls, and turns to frost. More ice accumulates. This is unavoidable. You need water, and getting water means adding moisture to your environment. The cycle is self-perpetuating. The more you melt snow, the more moisture you introduce. The more ice builds up, the more you have to manage the consequences. Food also contains moisture. Cooking rehydrates freeze-dried meals by adding hot water, and that water, once heated, produces steam. Even foods that seem dry like crackers or granola release moisture when chewed and mixed with saliva. All of this moisture ends up somewhere in the air, in your clothing, in the tent. The cumulative effect of all this moisture is that nothing stays dry. Your base layers become damp. Your sleeping bag becomes damp. Your socks, your gloves, your balaclava, all of them gradually accumulate moisture. Some of it freezes. Some of it stays liquid due to body heat. None of it goes away. You learn to tolerate it, to accept that dry is not a state you will achieve in the field. You aim instead for less wet, for managing the moisture well enough that it does not compromise your insulation or your safety. This is why expeditions have limits. You cannot stay in the field indefinitely because eventually your gear becomes so wet and isolated that it stops functioning. Sleeping bags lose loft, clothing loses insulating ability. Zippers stop working. At that point, you must return to a heated station, dry everything thoroughly, and reset the system. For some expeditions, this cycle happens every week. For others, it can be stretched to 2 or 3 weeks, but the limit always exists. Water in its invisible form as vapor is the enemy in Antarctic fieldwork. It infiltrates everything, compromises everything, and cannot be avoided. Managing it is not about winning, you cannot win, but about losing slowly enough that you can complete your work before your systems fail. The hours before sleep in an Antarctic field camp are structured by necessity. Sleep does not simply happen when you feel tired. It requires preparation, a sequence of tasks that transform your cold, exhausted body into something capable of rest. This preparation takes time, sometimes several hours, and it cannot be rushed. Each step serves a purpose, and skipping steps leads to a colder, more miserable night. The first task is getting warm. You've been working outside perhaps for 8 or 10 hours, and despite wearing insulated clothing, your core temperature has dropped. Your extremities, fingers, toes, face are cold. Your body is operating in a state of controlled hypothermia, where it has reduced blood flow to the periphery to protect vital organs. You need to reverse this process before climbing into a sleeping bag, because a sleeping bag does not generate heat. It only conserves the heat your body produces. If you go to bed cold, you will stay cold. Warming starts with movement. Once inside the tent, people do light exercises, arm circles, leg swings, jumping jacks if there is space. The goal is to increase circulation without producing sweat. Sweat at this stage is counterproductive. You want to generate internal heat, not moisture. After a few minutes of movement, you should feel warmth spreading from your core outward. The next step is changing clothes. The clothing you wore outside is likely damp from perspiration and breath condensation. Damp clothing will not keep you warm overnight. You need to change into dry base layers. This is not simple. The tent is cold, still 70 degrees below zero, just without wind. Undressing means exposing skin to that cold. The process has to be fast. You unzip your outer layers while staying mostly covered. Pull off your damp shirt and immediately pull on a dry one. Then pants, then socks. Each transition is brief, minimizing exposure. Dry socks are particularly important. Feet are far from the heart, receiving less blood flow and therefore less heat. Damp socks will sap warmth from your feet all night. Fresh, dry socks, preferably thick wool or synthetic insulating socks, make a measurable difference in comfort. Many researchers carry multiple pairs of socks specifically for this. One pair for sleeping, one pair for daytime, and perhaps a spare. Boots cannot come into the sleeping bag, but boot liners should. As discussed earlier, boot liners placed inside the bag stay pliable. The shells stay outside where they freeze solid, but you can put them on in the morning if the liners are flexible. Some people put the liners at the foot of their sleeping bag. Others keep them beside their body. There is no perfect solution. Either way, you're sleeping near cold objects, but the alternative is frozen liners that are unusable in the morning. Food is the next priority. The body needs fuel to generate heat overnight. At 70 degrees below zero, your basal metabolic rate increases dramatically. Your body is burning calories just to maintain its core temperature even while you sleep. If you go to bed hungry, you will get cold. This is not a metaphor. It is physiology. The body runs out of readily available glucose, slows its metabolism, and core temperature drops. Dinner in the field is calorie-dense by design. Researchers aim for 5,000 or more calories per day, and a significant portion of those calories come from the evening meal. Freeze-dried expedition food is engineered for this. High in fats and carbohydrates, easy to prepare, shelf-stable. A typical dinner might provide 1,500 to 2,000 calories. You eat all of it, even if you're not particularly hungry, because you need the energy. Cooking dinner requires melting snow. This is a multi-step process. First, you bring snow into the tent in a pot or bag. This snow is at 70 degrees below zero, and adding it directly to a pot on a stove will burn the pot before the snow melts. You have to start with a small amount of water if you have any left from earlier, or melt a thin layer of snow very slowly, then gradually add more snow as the liquid volume increases. The process takes time, often 30 to 45 minutes to produce enough water for cooking and drinking. While the snow melts, you prepare other aspects of dinner. You locate your food bag, check what meals are available, choose one, open the package. Freeze-dried meals require adding boiling water and waiting several minutes for rehydration. During those minutes, the meal is covered to retain heat. You wait. You check the time. You uncover the meal and stir it. Then you eat. Eating in extreme cold is slower than eating in normal conditions. The food cools quickly. Your hands are cold, making it harder to manipulate a spoon. Your mouth is dry from the arid air, making it harder to swallow. But you finish the meal because the calories matter. Some people add butter or oil to their meals to increase caloric content. A tablespoon of butter is 100 calories, almost pure fat, which the body can metabolize efficiently for heat. After dinner, there is hot liquid, tea, hot chocolate, broth, something warm to drink. This serves two purposes. First, the liquid itself adds warmth to your core, raising your internal temperature slightly. Second, staying hydrated is essential. The dry air makes you lose moisture through respiration faster than you realize. Dehydration reduces blood volume, impairs circulation, makes you feel colder. Drinking a liter of warm liquid in the evening offsets some of this loss. Some researchers also eat a snack just before getting into the sleeping bag. This is a practice borrowed from mountaineering. The logic is that digesting food produces heat. If you eat something fatty or protein-rich right before sleep, your body will be metabolizing it during the first hours of the night, generating extra warmth when you need it most. Cheese, nuts, chocolate, pemmican, anything calorie-dense and slow to digest. The sleeping bag itself must be prepared. It has been compressed in a stuffed sack all day, and the insulation has lost its loft. Before climbing in, you unpack the bag and shake it, fluffing the insulation so air can fill the spaces between the fibers. This restores its insulating capacity. If you skip this step, the bag will not keep you as warm. The sleeping pad is already laid out on the tent floor, but it may need adjusting. You check that it is centered, that there are no folds or gaps. If you're using two pads, you ensure they are aligned and not slipping. Small details matter. A gap in the pad means a cold spot on your back during the night. You organize items you will need during the night within reach. Water bottle if you're keeping one in the bag. Headlamp in case you need to see something. Pee bottle because leaving the tent in the middle of the night is dangerous and miserable. Any medication or personal items. These go near the head of the sleeping bag, where you can access them without fully emerging. Then there is the psychological preparation. You know the night ahead will be uncomfortable. You will wake up multiple times feeling cold, in your extremities, needing to shift position, checking the time to see how many hours remain until you can legitimately call it morning. You will hear the wind on the tent, hear the fabric flexing, hear the creak of snow settling outside. You will think about the cold, about the emptiness surrounding you, about how far you are from any help if something goes wrong. Managing this requires mental discipline. Some people use meditation or breathing exercises. Others focus on counting breaths or visualizing warm places. The goal is to calm the mind enough that sleep becomes possible. Anxiety raises metabolic rate, which sounds beneficial, more heat, but it also makes sleep impossible. And sleep is when your body recovers. You need rest more than you need the small amount of extra heat that stress produces. Finally, you climb into the sleeping bag. This is a process in itself. You sit on the edge of the pad, maneuver your legs into the bag, slide down while pulling the bag up around you. If you're using a vapor barrier liner, you have already climbed into that first. The layers are tight, restrictive. You cannot move freely. You cinch the hood of the sleeping bag around your face, leaving only a small opening for your nose and mouth. Your breath will fog the air in front of you, condensing as frost. But there is no avoiding it. You lie still for a moment, assessing. Are your feet cold? Your hands? Is your back comfortable against the pad? Can you breathe easily, or is the bag too tight around your face? You make small adjustments, then settle in. You turn off your headlamp. Darkness fills the tent. Outside, the wind continues. The temperature is 70 degrees below zero. Inside your sleeping bag, enclosed in layers of fabric and insulation, your body begins the slow work of generating enough heat to make sleep possible. Climbing into a sleeping bag at 70 degrees C below zero is not like climbing into bed at home. It is a deliberate act, a transition into a state of vulnerability that requires both physical and psychological commitment. The sleeping bag is your survival tool for the next 8 or 10 hours, and how you enter it determines in part how the night will go. The first sensation is cold. The sleeping bag has been sitting in the tent all day, and the tent is as cold as the outside air. The fabric of the bag is stiff, almost rigid. The insulation inside has been compressed during storage and may not have fully lofted yet even after shaking it out. When you first slide your legs into the bag, the fabric feels like it is made of ice. It is not warm. It will not become warm on its own. It will only become warm if your body can generate enough heat to overcome the initial cold mass of the bag. This is the first challenge, the shock of entering a cold sleeping bag. Your instinct is to recoil, to pull back, to wait for the bag to warm up somehow before committing. But that is not how it works. The bag will only warm if you're inside it. You have to push through the discomfort. Get fully inside, seal yourself in, and wait while your body does the work. The process of getting into the bag is mechanical. You sit on the sleeping pad, legs dangling. You open the bag zipper most of the way down, creating a wide opening. You insert your legs one at a time, sliding them down into the footbox of the bag. The fabric resists. It does not want to accommodate your bulk. You push your legs deeper, feeling the cold fabric press against your ankles, your calves, your knees. Next, you lower your torso. You lean back, supporting yourself with your hands, and slide your hips and lower back into the bag. Now, you are half in, half out. You pause to adjust the position of the bag around your legs, making sure it is not twisted. Twists create gaps in the insulation, cold spots that will bother you later. You smooth the fabric, pull it straight. Check that your feet are centered in the footbox. Now your arms. You slide one arm into the bag, then the other, pulling the bag up over your shoulders. This is awkward. The bag is tight around your body, limiting your range of motion. You have to work the fabric up bit by bit, wiggling and shifting. If you're wearing a jacket inside the bag, the layers bunch up. You have to pause and smooth them out, pulling the jacket down so it lies flat against your torso. The hood comes next. Sleeping bags designed for extreme cold have hoods that cinch tightly around your head, leaving only a small opening for your face. You pull the hood up, position it so it covers your head and ears. Then reach for the drawstrings. These strings are usually inside the bag near your chest, and finding them in the dark is a tactile task. You pull the strings, tightening the hood until it fits snugly. Too loose and cold air will enter. Too tight and you feel suffocated. The balance is delicate. There is also a draft collar, a tube of insulation inside the bag around your neck and shoulders that prevents warm air from escaping through the top of the bag. You adjust this collar, pulling it close around your neck, sealing the gap. Now you are fully enclosed. Only your face is exposed, and even that is partially covered by the hood. You lie still, breathing through the small opening, and wait. The first 10 minutes are the worst. You're cold. The bag is cold. Your body is working to generate heat, but it has not yet warmed the air inside the bag. You shiver. This is normal, even expected. Shivering is the body's way of producing heat through rapid muscle contractions. It is uncomfortable but effective. You let yourself shiver, trusting that it will pass. During these minutes, You're acutely aware of every cold spot. Your feet are cold. The tips of your toes feel numb. Your hands tucked inside the bag are cold. Your back pressed against the sleeping pad is cold where the pad is thinnest. You want to move to shift position to do something that will generate more heat. But moving also disrupts the thin layer of warm air that is beginning to form around your body. You have to stay still as much as possible and let the system work. Gradually, warmth begins to accumulate. It starts near your core, your chest, and abdomen, where blood flow is strongest. The insulation around your core traps the heat your organs produce. This heat spreads slowly outward, moving through the layers of clothing and into the sleeping bag's insulation. After 20 or 30 minutes, you notice that your torso is no longer cold. It is not warm. Exactly, but it is no longer painful. Your extremities take longer. Feet and hands are the last to warm because they are farthest from your core and have the least blood flow. Some people never get their feet fully warm during a night in extreme cold. The best you can hope for is that they stop hurting, that the cold becomes a dull ache rather than a sharp pain. You wiggle your toes periodically, trying to maintain circulation, trying to convince blood to flow into those distant capillaries. Breathing inside a sleeping bag is another adjustment. Your breath is warm and moist, and when it meets the cold air inside the bag, it condenses into water vapor. If you breathe directly into the bag, this vapor settles on the insulation where it freezes. Over hours, this accumulation of ice reduces the bag's effectiveness. To prevent this, you breathe through the small opening in the hood, directing your breath outside the bag. This means exposing your face to cold air all night. Your nose and cheeks get cold. Frost forms on any exposed skin, but this is preferable to ruining your sleeping bag. Some people wear a balaclava or face mask inside the sleeping bag, covering everything except their eyes and a small area around their nose and mouth. This reduces the amount of exposed skin and helps keep facial tissue warmer. The trade-off is that the balaclava itself collects moisture from breath, becoming damp and eventually frozen. In the morning, the balaclava will be stiff with ice, and you will have to peel it off your face. Positioning inside the sleeping bag is limited. You cannot roll over easily. The bag is tight, and turning your body means fighting against the fabric. Most people sleep on their backs or sides, whichever position feels least uncomfortable. You cannot stretch out your legs fully because the bag tapers toward the feet. You cannot spread your arms because the bag pins them to your sides. You are confined, restricted, held in place by the very thing that is keeping you alive. This confinement can be claustrophobic. You're sealed inside a fabric envelope in a tent in the middle of a frozen desert where no help is available. If something goes wrong, if the tent collapses, if you become ill, if you panic, you're on your own. This knowledge sits in the back of your mind, a low-level anxiety that never fully goes away. You manage it by focusing on the immediate, the sound of the wind, the rhythm of your breathing, the slow warming of your body. Time inside the sleeping bag moves strangely. You're not asleep yet, but you're not fully awake either. You exist in a liminal state, aware of the cold, aware of the discomfort, but too exhausted to do anything about it. You close your eyes. You try to relax. You count breaths. You think about the work you did that day, the work you will do tomorrow. You think about being warm. You imagine sunlight. Imagine a heated room. Imagine anything other than where you are. At some point, without realizing it, you cross the threshold into sleep. Not deep sleep. Your body cannot afford deep sleep in these conditions. But a light, fitful sleep where you are semi-conscious, dreaming in fragments, waking every hour or two to check the time, to shift position, to assess whether you are still warm enough. This shallow sleep is what passes for rest in the Antarctic field. It is not restorative in the way sleep normally is, but it is enough. Your body gets some recovery, your mind gets some respite, and when morning comes, you're able to function. Entering the sleeping bag is the act of accepting this state. You're not going to be comfortable. You're not going to sleep well, but you're going to survive the night, and that is the goal. You climb into the bag, seal yourself in, and surrender to the cold, trusting that your preparation and your equipment and your body's resilience will carry you through to morning. Night in an Antarctic field tent is not restful. It is an endurance event, a series of hours spent managing cold, discomfort, and the shallow half-sleep that comes when the body cannot fully relax. You lie in your sleeping bag, eyes closed, aware of every sensation, waiting for morning. The cold is always present, even inside a well-insulated sleeping bag. Even after your core has warmed, you remain aware of the temperature. Your face is cold. Your nose is cold. If your hands have slipped outside the warmest part of the bag, they are cold. Your feet at the far end of the sleeping system are cold. The cold is not acute pain, not frostbite, just a persistent chill that your body has to work constantly to counteract. This work is metabolic. Your body is burning calories to generate heat, maintaining your core temperature in an environment that is trying to pull that heat away. This metabolic activity prevents deep sleep. Deep sleep requires the body to lower its metabolic rate to relax into a state of minimal energy expenditure. But in extreme cold, lowering metabolic rate would mean lowering core temperature, which would mean hypothermia. Your body does not allow this. It keeps you in a lighter stage of sleep, one where metabolism stays elevated, where you remain semi-alert to threats. The result is that you drift. You're not fully asleep. You're not fully awake. You hover in a twilight state, aware of the wind outside, aware of the fabric of the sleeping bag against your face, aware of your own breathing. Thoughts come and go, disjointed and dreamlike, but you're conscious enough to know they are thoughts, not dreams. This is not the restorative sleep of a warm bed. This is survival sleep. You wake frequently. Sometimes it is because you are cold. A foot has slipped into a less insulated part of the bag, or your shoulder is pressed against the tent wall where cold is seeping through. You wake, shift your position, adjust the sleeping bag, try to redistribute warmth. Then you close your eyes again and wait for sleep to return. Other times you wake because you need to urinate. This is one of the most challenging aspects of sleeping in extreme cold. The body produces urine continuously, and in cold conditions it produces more. Cold causes blood vessels in the periphery to constrict, shunting blood toward the core. This increases blood volume in the central circulation, which the kidneys interpret as a signal to produce more urine. The result is that you need to pee frequently even if you have not drunk much liquid. Leaving the sleeping bag to urinate outside is not practical. It means unzipping the sleeping bag, exposing yourself to the cold, putting on boots and outerwear, unzipping the tent, going outside into 70-degree below zero air, and then reversing the process to get back into the bag. The entire ordeal can take 10 or 15 minutes, and by the time you're back in the bag, you have lost all the warmth you spent hours building up. You will spend the next hour shivering, trying to get warm again. The solution is a pee bottle. This is a wide-mouth bottle, usually a liter or larger, kept inside the sleeping bag or just outside it within easy reach. When you need to urinate, you retrieve the bottle, maneuver yourself into a position where you can use it without spilling and empty your bladder. Then you seal the bottle tightly and place it outside the sleeping bag, where it will freeze solid by morning. This sounds simple but is not. Doing this in the dark while lying down, while mostly enclosed in a sleeping bag, requires practice. Spills happen. When they do, the urine freezes immediately, creating a mess that is difficult to clean. Most people become proficient at this task out of sheer necessity. But it is never pleasant. It is simply less unpleasant than the alternative. The wind is a constant presence. You hear it against the tent fabric, a sound that varies from a low murmur to a sharp crack depending on wind speed. The tent flexes and shifts, moving with the gusts. The poles creak. The guidelines hum. These sounds are not soothing. They are reminders that the only thing between you and the environment is a thin layer of nylon, that the wind is strong enough to destroy the tent if something fails, that you're exposed in a way that is fundamentally precarious. When the wind gusts particularly hard, the tent walls press inward, and you feel the pressure. If you're lying near the wall, the fabric might brush against your sleeping bag. This is unnerving. You imagine the tent collapsing, burying you in fabric, trapping you. This does not happen. Modern expedition tents are engineered to withstand extreme wind. But the fear is there. During calmer moments, when the wind drops, A different kind of silence settles over the tent. This silence is profound. There is no sound from outside at all. No animals, no water, no human activity. Inside the tent, you hear only the breathing of your tent mates, if you have any, and the occasional rustle of fabric as someone shifts in their sleeping bag. The silence is both peaceful and oppressive. It emphasizes the isolation, the emptiness, the distance from anything familiar. If you're sharing the tent with others, their presence is both comforting and complicating. You can hear them breathe, hear them move. Know that you are not alone. This is psychologically important. Humans are social animals, and even in extreme conditions, the proximity of other people provides reassurance. But sharing a small tent also means limited space, coordinated movement, and sometimes interpersonal friction. If someone snores, everyone is affected. If someone thrashes in their sleep, everyone feels it. You learn to tolerate these disruptions because the alternative, sleeping alone, carries its own risks. Temperature fluctuates through the night. Early in the night, after you have just entered the sleeping bag and your body's working hard to generate warmth, you may feel almost comfortable. But as the night progresses and fatigue sets in, your metabolic rate decreases slightly and the cold creeps back. By the early morning hours, you are coldest. This is when people feel most miserable, when the temptation to check the time and see how much longer until you can legitimately get up is strongest. Checking the time is a mistake most people make repeatedly. You wake feeling cold and uncomfortable and think that surely it must be almost morning. You fumble for your watch or phone, turn on the screen, and see that only 2 hours have passed since you last checked. The realization that you have 6 more hours to endure is demoralizing. Time moves slowly when you are cold and uncomfortable. Minutes feel like hours. The night stretches on, seemingly without end. Dreams, when they come, are fragmented. You do not reach REM sleep, the deep restorative phase where most dreaming occurs because your body cannot afford to enter that state. The dreams you do have are shallow, often involving cold or discomfort. You dream that you're outside in the wind. You dream that your sleeping bag is wet. You dream that you cannot get warm. These dreams are not restful. They blur the line between sleep and waking, making you unsure when you wake whether you are actually asleep or just lying there thinking. Physical discomfort accumulates. Your hips and shoulders pressed against the sleeping pad begin to ache. The pad provides insulation, but is not particularly soft. You're lying on ice, and even with padding, the surface is hard. You shift position to relieve the pressure, but shifting is difficult inside the confines of the sleeping bag. You manage to roll onto your other side, and the relief is temporary. Soon that side begins to ache as well. Your nose runs. The cold air irritates your nasal passages and mucus production increases. You do not have tissue readily available inside the sleeping bag, so you either endure the drip or reach out into the cold air to grab something to wipe your nose with. This means exposing your hand to the cold, which starts the cycle of cold extremities again. Frost accumulates inside the tent. Every time someone exhales, moisture is added to the air. This moisture condenses on the coldest surfaces, which are the tent walls. By morning, the interior of the tent will be coated with a layer of frost. During the night, if you brush against the tent wall, this frost dislodges and falls onto your sleeping bag. You feel it through the fabric, tiny ice crystals landing on you. It is annoying but unavoidable. There are moments of unexpected beauty during the night. If you open your eyes, you might see faint light filtering through the tent fabric, starlight, or the green and red glow of the aurora borealis. The southern lights are common during the Antarctic winter, though seeing them from inside a tent is different from seeing them under open sky. The colors are muted, diffused through the tent fabric, but they are there, a reminder that something exists beyond the immediate sphere of cold and discomfort. Eventually, after what feels like an eternity, you notice that the quality of your discomfort is changing. You're not warmer, but you're accustomed to the cold. Your body has settled into a kind of equilibrium. You're no longer fighting the cold. You are coexisting with it. This is a subtle shift, but it allows you to relax slightly, to stop monitoring every sensation, to drift more deeply into whatever passes for sleep in these conditions. And then at some point, you realize that the night is almost over. You have survived the hours of darkness. Morning is approaching, which means you will soon have to leave the sleeping bag and face the cold again. But for now, you have made it through. You lie still, savoring the last minutes of relative warmth, knowing that once you emerge, the cycle will begin again. Night in an Antarctic field tent is not restful. It is an endurance event, a series of hours spent managing cold, discomfort, and the shallow half-sleep that comes when the body cannot fully relax. You lie in your sleeping bag, eyes closed, aware of every sensation, waiting for morning. The cold is always present, even inside a well-insulated sleeping bag. Even after your core has warmed, you remain aware of the temperature. Your face is cold. Your nose is cold. If your hands have slipped outside the warmest part of the bag, they are cold. Your feet at the far end of the sleeping system are cold. The cold is not acute pain, not frostbite, just a persistent chill that your body has to work constantly to counteract. This work is metabolic. Your body is burning calories to generate heat, maintaining your core temperature in an environment that is trying to pull that heat away. This metabolic activity prevents deep sleep. Deep sleep requires the body to lower its metabolic rate to relax into a state of minimal energy expenditure. But in extreme cold, lowering metabolic rate would mean lowering core temperature, which would mean hypothermia. Your body does not allow this. It keeps you in a lighter stage of sleep, one where metabolism stays elevated, where you remain semi-alert to threats. The result is that you drift. You're not fully asleep. You're not fully awake. You hover in a twilight state, aware of the wind outside, aware of the fabric of the sleeping bag against your face, aware of your own breathing. Thoughts come and go, disjointed and dreamlike. But you're conscious enough to know they are thoughts, not dreams. This is not the restorative sleep of a warm bed. This is survival sleep. You wake frequently. Sometimes it is because you are cold. A foot has slipped into a less insulated part of the bag, or your shoulder is pressed against the tent wall where cold is seeping through. You wake, shift your position, adjust the sleeping bag, try to redistribute warmth. Then you close your eyes again and wait for sleep to return. Other times you wake because you need to urinate. This is one of the most challenging aspects of sleeping in extreme cold. The body produces urine continuously, and in cold conditions it produces more. Cold causes blood vessels in the periphery to constrict, shunting blood toward the core. This increases blood volume in the central circulation, which the kidneys interpret as a signal to produce more urine. The result is that you need to pee frequently, even if you have not drunk much liquid. Leaving the sleeping bag to urinate outside is not practical. It means unzipping the sleeping bag, exposing yourself to the cold, putting on boots and outer ear, unzipping the tent, going outside into 70 below zero air, and then reversing the process to get back into the bag. The entire ordeal can take 10 or 15 minutes, and by the time you're back in the bag, you have lost all the warmth you spent hours building up. You will spend the next hour shivering trying to get warm again. The solution is a pee bottle. This is a wide-mouth bottle, usually a liter or larger, kept inside the sleeping bag or just outside it within easy reach. When you need to urinate, you retrieve the bottle, maneuver yourself into a position where you can use it without spilling and empty your bladder. Then you seal the bottle tightly and place it outside the sleeping bag where it will freeze solid by morning. This sounds simple but is not. Doing this in the dark while lying down, while mostly enclosed in a sleeping bag, requires practice. Spills happen. When they do, the urine freezes immediately, creating a mess that is difficult to clean. Most people become proficient at this task out of sheer necessity. But it is never pleasant. It is simply less unpleasant than the alternative. The wind is a constant presence. You hear it against the tent fabric, a sound that varies from a low murmur to a sharp crack depending on wind speed. The tent flexes and shifts, moving with the gusts. The poles creak. The guidelines hum. These sounds are not soothing. They are reminders that the only thing between you and the environment is a thin layer of nylon. That the wind is strong enough to destroy the tent if something fails. That you're exposed in a way that is fundamentally precarious. When the wind gusts particularly hard, The tent walls press inward and you feel the pressure. If you're lying near the wall, the fabric might brush against your sleeping bag. This is unnerving. You imagine the tent collapsing, burying you in fabric, trapping you. This does not happen. Modern expedition tents are engineered to withstand extreme wind, but the fear is there. During calmer moments, when the wind drops, a different kind of silence settles over the tent. This silence is profound. There is no sound from outside at all. No animals, no water, no human activity. Inside the tent, you hear only the breathing of your tent mates, if you have any, and the occasional rustle of fabric as someone shifts in their sleeping bag. The silence is both peaceful and oppressive. It emphasizes the isolation, the emptiness, the distance from anything familiar. If you're sharing the tent with others, their presence is both comforting and complicating. You can hear them breathe, hear them move, know that you are not alone. This is psychologically important. Humans are social animals, and even in extreme conditions, the proximity of other people provides reassurance. But sharing a small tent also means limited space, coordinated movement, and sometimes interpersonal friction. If someone snores, everyone is affected. If someone thrashes in their sleep, everyone feels it. You learn to tolerate these disruptions because the alternative, sleeping alone, carries its own risks. Temperature fluctuates through the night. Early in the night, after you have just entered the sleeping bag and your body's working hard to generate warmth, you may feel almost comfortable. But as the night progresses and fatigue sets in, your metabolic rate decreases slightly and the cold creeps back. By the early morning hours, you are coldest. This is when people feel most miserable, when the temptation to check the time and see how much longer until you can legitimately get up is strongest. Checking the time is a mistake most people make repeatedly. You wake feeling cold and uncomfortable and think that surely it must be almost morning. You fumble for your watch or phone, turn on the screen, and see that only 2 hours have passed since you last checked. The realization that you have 6 more hours to endure is demoralizing. Time moves slowly when you are cold and uncomfortable. Minutes feel like hours. The night stretches on, seemingly without end. Dreams, when they come, are fragmented. You do not reach REM sleep, the deep restorative phase where most dreaming occurs, because your body cannot afford to enter that state. The dreams you do have are shallow, often involving cold or discomfort. You dream that you're outside in the wind. You dream that your sleeping bag is wet. You dream that you cannot get warm. These dreams are not restful. They blur the line between sleep and waking, making you unsure when you wake whether you are actually asleep or just lying there thinking. Physical discomfort accumulates. Your hips and shoulders pressed against the sleeping pad begin to ache. The pad provides insulation but is not particularly soft. You're lying on ice, and even with padding, the surface is hard. You shift position to relieve the pressure, but shifting is difficult inside the confines of the sleeping bag. You manage to roll onto your other side and the relief is temporary. Soon that side begins to ache as well. Your nose runs. The cold air irritates your nasal passages, and mucus production increases. You do not have tissue readily available inside the sleeping bag. So you either endure the drip or reach out into the cold air to grab something to wipe your nose with. This means exposing your hand to the cold, which starts the cycle of cold extremities again. Frost accumulates inside the tent. Every time someone exhales, moisture is added to the air. This moisture condenses on the coldest surfaces, which are the tent walls. By morning, the interior of the tent will be coated with a layer of frost. During the night, if you brush against the tent wall, this frost dislodges and falls onto your sleeping bag. You feel it through the fabric, tiny ice crystals landing on you. It is annoying but unavoidable. There are moments of unexpected beauty during the night. If you open your eyes, you might see faint light filtering through the tent fabric, starlight, or the green and red glow of the aurora or strace. The southern lights are common during the Antarctic winter, though seeing them from inside a tent is different from seeing them under open sky. The colors are muted, diffused through the tent fabric, but they are there, a reminder that something exists beyond the immediate sphere of cold and discomfort. Eventually, after what feels like an eternity, you notice that the quality of your discomfort is changing. You're not warmer, but you're accustomed to the cold. Your body has settled into a kind of equilibrium. You're no longer fighting the cold. You are coexisting with it. This is a subtle shift, but it allows you to relax slightly, to stop monitoring every sensation, to drift more deeply into whatever passes for sleep in these conditions. And then at some point, you realize that the night is almost over. You have survived the hours of darkness. Morning is approaching, which means you will soon have to leave the sleeping bag and face the cold again. But for now, you have made it through. You lie still, savoring the last minutes of relative warmth, knowing that once you emerge, the cycle will begin again. The human body at rest generates roughly 100 W of heat, about the same as a standard incandescent light bulb. This heat comes from metabolic processes, cells breaking down glucose, converting chemical energy into the energy needed for cellular functions with heat as a byproduct. In a temperate environment, this heat is more than the body needs. We dissipate excess heat through radiation, convection, and evaporation, maintaining a core temperature of around 37°. In Antarctica, at 7°C below zero, the situation is reversed. The body is not producing too much heat. It is producing far too little. The environment is pulling heat away faster than resting metabolism can replace it. To survive, the body must either generate more heat or reduce heat loss. Both strategies come into play. Increasing heat production means increasing metabolic rate. Shivering is the most direct method. Muscle contractions generate heat as a byproduct, and shivering can increase heat production by 4 or 5 times the resting rate, temporarily pushing output up to 500 W or more. But shivering is exhausting. It burns through glucose rapidly, and it cannot be sustained indefinitely. The body will shiver for a while, then stop, allowing metabolism to drop back closer to baseline before shivering resumes. This creates a cycle during sleep. You shiver, you warm slightly, you stop shivering, you cool slightly, you shiver again. The cycle is not smooth. It is a series of oscillations, and each cycle costs energy. Over a night, these cycles add up. A person sleeping in a tent at 70 below might burn 2,000 calories or more, just maintaining body temperature without counting any physical activity during the day. This is why food is so critical. The body needs fuel to run this metabolic furnace. If you go to sleep without enough calories in your system, your body will run out of glucose, switch to burning fat and muscle, and still may not produce enough heat. Core temperature will drop, moving you toward hypothermia. Even mild hypothermia, a core temperature of 35 gloiders instead of 37, impairs cognitive function, slows reactions, and makes you more vulnerable to further cooling. The other strategy is reducing heat loss. This is where the sleeping system comes in. Heat leaves the body through 4 mechanisms: conduction, convection, radiation, and evaporation. Each must be minimized. Conduction is heat transfer through direct contact. Your body is in contact with the sleeping pad, and the pad is in contact with ice. Without the pad, heat would flow directly from your body into the ice at a rate that would kill you within an hour. The sleeping pad interrupts this flow. Its foam or air-filled chambers are poor conductors, slowing the transfer. The thicker and more insulating the pad, measured by its R value, the less heat you lose through conduction. An R value of 7 means you lose roughly 1/17 as much heat through conduction as you would with no pad at all. Convection is heat transfer through moving air. If cold air circulates around your body, it carries away heat. The sleeping bag stops this by trapping air in thousands of small pockets within its insulation. Still, air is a poor conductor, so these pockets act as barriers. The more insulation, the more air pockets, the less heat you lose. This is why a -50 rated bag has more insulation than a -20 rated bag. It is not about the fabric being warmer. It is about the volume of still air the bag can maintain around your body. Radiation is heat transfer through infrared energy. All warm objects emit infrared radiation, and your body is no exception. In a cold environment, you radiate heat into the surrounding space. The sleeping bag's outer shell reflects some of this radiation back toward your body, reducing loss. Some sleeping bags include reflective liners, thin metallic films that enhance this effect, bouncing more infrared radiation back. Evaporation is heat transfer through the phase change of water from liquid to vapor. When sweat evaporates from your skin, it carries heat away. In extreme cold, evaporation is minimal because the air is so dry that moisture turns to ice rather than vapor. But you still lose heat through the water vapor in your breath. Every exhale carries warm, moist air out of your body, and that air carries heat with it. This loss is unavoidable, but it is why breathing outside the sleeping bag rather than inside helps preserve the bag's insulation. The balance of heat production and heat loss determines whether you stay warm enough to sleep. If production exceeds loss, your core temperature stays stable or rises. If loss exceeds production, core temperature drops. The goal is equilibrium, producing just enough heat to offset loss, maintaining 37 degrees. In practice, this equilibrium is fragile. Small changes make a difference. If the wind picks up and cools the tent, heat loss increases. If you did not eat enough dinner, heat production decreases. If your sleeping pad has a small leak and its R value drops, conduction increases. Any of these factors can push you from comfortable or at least tolerable cold into dangerous cold. The body has a hierarchy of responses as it cools. First, it restricts blood flow to the skin and extremities, keeping warm blood in the core. This is why fingers and toes get cold first. They are being sacrificed to protect vital organs. If cooling continues, shivering begins. If it continues beyond that, mental function deteriorates. You become confused, make poor decisions, stop caring about the cold. This is a sign of moderate hypothermia, and it is dangerous because the person affected often does not realize something is wrong. In a field tent, this progression is rarely allowed to reach dangerous levels because people are monitoring themselves. You know when you are too cold, you know that you need to eat more, add a layer, fix a problem with your sleeping system. But there have been cases where exhaustion, illness, or isolation prevented someone from recognizing the signs. Hypothermia can be insidious. It creeps in slowly, dulling the mind even as it steals heat from the body. There are physiological adaptations that occur over time. People who spend extended periods in extreme cold develop some tolerance. Their bodies become more efficient at generating heat. Their circulation improves slightly, keeping extremities warmer. Psychological adaptation also plays a role. You learn to tolerate discomfort, to distinguish between cold that is merely unpleasant and cold that is dangerous. This learned tolerance is as important as physical adaptation. Sleep itself complicates the equation. During deep sleep, metabolic rate drops by about 15%. This is normal and healthy in a warm environment, allowing the body to conserve energy and focus on repair processes. But in extreme cold, this drop in metabolic rate means less heat production. If you enter deep sleep in a sleeping bag that is just barely keeping you warm, the drop in heat production might be enough to push you into mild hypothermia. This is one reason why sleep is light in the Antarctic field. The body does not allow itself to enter deep sleep because it cannot afford the corresponding drop in heat production. The numbers are not abstractions. A person sleeping in a tent at 70 below zero is engaged in a constant quantifiable battle between heat generation and heat loss. The sleeping bag, the pad, the vapor barrier, the food you ate, the water you drank, all of these are variables in an equation that determines whether you wake up in the morning feeling exhausted but alive, or whether you wake up with frostbite, hypothermia, or not at all. Understanding this mathematics does not make the night more comfortable, but it does provide context. When you're lying in your sleeping bag shivering, wishing you were warmer, it helps to know that your body is doing exactly what it should be doing. It is fighting the cold through every mechanism available to it. The discomfort is not a sign that something is wrong. It is a sign that the system is working, that you are surviving. And survival in this environment is the only metric that matters. Waking in an Antarctic field tent is not like waking anywhere else. There is no gentle transition from sleep to wakefulness, no gradual warming of the air, no light creeping through a window. You wake because your alarm goes off, or because your body has had all the sleep it can manage, or because you're too cold to stay still any longer. You open your eyes to darkness, the same darkness that was there when you closed them, and the temperature inside the tent is still 70 degrees below zero. The first decision of the day is whether to stay in the sleeping bag a little longer or start the process of getting up. Staying in the bag is tempting. You're not warm, but you are warmer than you will be once you leave the bag. The moment you unzip and expose yourself to the air, you will start losing heat rapidly. Every minute you delay is another minute of relative comfort. But delaying also means delaying breakfast, delaying the start of work, delaying the moment when you can begin generating heat through activity instead of lying still. Most people compromise. They stay in the bag for a few minutes, allowing their mind to wake fully, preparing themselves mentally for what comes next. Then they begin the process of emergence. The first task is warming your core before you leave the bag. This means eating something while still inside. Many researchers keep a snack, a candy bar, a packet of nuts, something calorie-dense inside their sleeping bag overnight where body heat keeps it from freezing solid. You eat this snack now in the darkness while still enclosed. The calories will start metabolizing immediately, giving your body fuel to generate heat during the cold process of getting dressed. Next, you retrieve your clothing. The clothes you will wear today are not the clothes you slept in. Those are damp from the night's perspiration. You need dry base layers, and ideally, you kept these inside the sleeping bag with you, using body heat to keep them warm and dry. You also kept your boot liners in the bag. Now you need to put them on before they cool. Dressing inside a sleeping bag is awkward. You cannot sit up fully because the tent ceiling is low. You cannot spread out because the bag is narrow. You work by feel, maneuvering fabric in the confined space. You pull off your sleeping shirt and immediately pull on the fresh base layer. The transition is brief, but even those few seconds of exposed skin are punishing. The cold is sharp, immediate. You rush to cover yourself. Pants are next. You wriggle out of your sleeping pants while pulling on the day's pants. A complex dance of fabric and limbs in a space that barely accommodates either. Then socks. You peel off the damp socks you slept in and pull on dry ones. Your feet are cold and the act of changing socks exposes them to the air, making them colder. You work quickly. Now boots. The boot liners are in the sleeping bag with you, still pliable from body heat. The shells are outside, frozen, solid. You pull the liners on over your socks, then reach out of the sleeping bag to grab the shells. The shells are painfully cold. Even through your hand's insulation, you can feel the cold radiating from them. You force your foot, now wearing the liner, into the frozen shell. The shell does not want to accommodate your foot. The material is rigid. You push harder, wedging your foot in, then repeat the process with the other boot. Your feet are now inside stiff, cold shells. They will remain cold for at least an hour until your body generates enough heat to warm the boots from the inside. Only after you're dressed do you leave the sleeping bag. You unzip it fully, sit up, and swing your legs over the edge of the pad. The transition is jarring. You are enclosed, relatively protected. Now you are exposed. The cold wraps around you immediately, finding every gap in your clothing. You stand hunched in the low-ceiling tent and begin the morning tasks. The tent is coated with frost. Every surface, walls, ceiling, gear bags has a layer of ice crystals from the moisture produced overnight. This frost will fall throughout the morning as people move around dusting everything with ice. You accept this. It is part of the morning routine. The first priority is water. You're dehydrated from the night. The dry air pulled moisture from your body, and you need to replace it. But there is no water. There is only ice. You need to melt snow. Melting snow is a process that takes time. You retrieve the stove, check that it is functional, prime it if necessary, and light it. The stove is cold, and cold stoves are finicky. The fuel may not vaporize properly. The igniter may not spark. You persist using matches if needed until the stove catches and burns with a steady blue flame. You fill a pot with snow, place it on the stove, and wait. The snow does not melt quickly. It compacts first, then slowly softens, then finally turns to water. You add more snow to the pot as space allows, gradually building up the volume of water. After 30 or 40 minutes, you have enough water to drink and to prepare breakfast. While the snow melts, you organize gear. Sleeping bags get shaken out to remove frost, then loosely packed. Sleeping pads get rolled. Personal items get stowed in stuffed sacks. The tent interior, which was cluttered the night before, is gradually restored to order. This organization is necessary because the tent must function as both sleeping space and workspace, and transitioning between the two requires deliberate effort. Breakfast is similar to dinner. Freeze-dried food rehydrated with boiling water. You choose a meal, open the packet, add water, wait for rehydration, then eat. The food is warm, which is psychologically comforting, even if the warmth does not last long. You also drink hot tea, coffee, or chocolate, replacing some of the fluid you lost overnight. Eating and drinking take longer than they would in normal conditions because everything is cold, and cold slows you down. Your hands are stiff. Your jaw is cold, making chewing uncomfortable. The food itself cools quickly, becoming less palatable. But you finish the meal because you need the calories. The day ahead will require energy. Energy to stay warm. Energy to work. Energy to survive. After breakfast, you dress for outside. This means adding layers. Insulated pants over your base layer, an insulated jacket, a windproof outer shell, gloves, a balaclava, goggles, a hat. Each layer has a purpose. Each layer adds bulk and restricts movement. By the time you're fully dressed, you're wearing perhaps 5 kilos of clothing. You're bulky, stiff, limited in your range of motion, but you are protected. Exiting the tent is a moment of transition. You open the zipper, a task that requires care because zippers freeze, and step out into the darkness and wind. The cold hits you immediately, even through all your layers. The wind is a physical force pushing against you. If it is strong enough, you lean into it to keep your balance. You close the tent door behind you to prevent heat, such as it is, from escaping. Outside, you assess the camp. Are the tents still secure? Have any guidelines loosened overnight? Is there new snow that needs to be cleared? You walk the perimeter, checking anchors, retightening lines, making adjustments. This is part of the morning routine. The camp is a system, and systems require maintenance. Then the day's work begins. Depending on the nature of the research, this might mean setting up equipment, collecting samples, traveling to a field site, or conducting measurements. The work is physical, which means you generate heat, which means you start to warm up. Your feet, which have been cold, since you put your boots on, gradually become less painful. Your hands, working inside gloves, maintain some dexterity. You fall into the rhythm of the task, focusing on the work, and the cold becomes background rather than foreground. But the cold never goes away. It is always there, a constant pressure, a force that requires vigilance. You monitor your body continuously. Are your fingers getting numb? Is your face exposed too long? Are you sweating inside your layers? Each of these is a problem that needs addressing. You adjust your clothing, add or remove layers, take breaks to check for frostbite. The work is important, but staying alive is more important. The morning stretches into afternoon, though in the polar night looks exactly like morning. Dark, cold, windy. Time is marked by tasks completed, by meals eaten, by the slow accumulation of hours. Eventually, the workday ends and you return to the tent to begin the evening routine. The cycle continues. Sleep, wake, work, sleep. Days blur together. You lose track of dates. All that matters is the immediate. The next meal, the next sleep cycle, the next day's work. Morning in the freeze is not a beginning in the traditional sense. It is simply a continuation. The cold did not stop overnight. The wind did not stop. The darkness did not stop. You stopped briefly to rest. Now you resume. This is the reality of Antarctic fieldwork. There is no break from the environment. There is only management, endurance, and the steady passage of time until the work is done. And you can return to a place where sleep does not require quite so much effort.